Hello, everybody. Can you hear us? Hello, everybody. Can you hear us? Hello, everybody. Can you hear us? Hello, everybody. Let's try that without the echo. Can you hear us now?
Hello.
Alrighty.
Got Julie.
Julie.
Okay.
Yeah, so that should be everybody. If you can hear me and you can hear Julie, you'll be able to hear everybody because everyone else is coming in on the same sound channel. Take it away, Julie.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Hold My Pen Promcast presents Booked for Friday. Our author, narrator, and anybody who really just helps us bring our stuff to life. Interviews. Today we have Ben Shakeman up in the corner. Um, and we have Mr. Douglas Smith in the other corner. And these two will be our lovely peoples for tonight. I would say our victims, but that just sounds mad.
Yeah, we use that too often. You know, people are
Yeah, we
beginning
really do
to
use it a little
get
often.
desensitized to it. We have to strike fear. You guys have been here before. You guys know how the drill goes on Friday nights at this point. It's only our second show, but you're fast learners. Our names are either below or above our camera feeds, so you know who everybody is. Our authors have their socials scrolling next to their names, so keep an eye on those. They are not clickable links. It will just pause the video. Don't do that. You're just gonna have to type it in as it goes. Um, but we have, yes, as Julie mentioned, our two guests tonight. We have a native of Connecticut, cat lover, coffee lover, uh, author of My Brother's Keeper, The Cycle of Ash, Book 1, and Urban Fantasy, Ben Shankman.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me.
And joining us as well, we have, I skipped right on past that section. There we go. 5-time award winning author, described by Library Journal as one of Canada's most original writers of speculative fiction, including multiple works of urban fantasy like the Dream Rider saga that we have showcased for you tonight. We have Douglas Smith. Welcome.
Thanks, Dex. Thanks, Julie. Great to be on.
I'm gonna let I asked the first question last week, so I'm gonna let Julie ask the first question this week. And we will alternate who answers first between top and bottom box on each question. We'll start with Ben. Julie, kick it off, and on my question, Doug will answer first.
Okay. First, before we start our question portion of the evening, um, Ben, would you tell us a little bit about yourself that Sticks didn't cover, and a little bit about your books and who you are as a both narrator and author?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Also, kudos. Thank you, everyone. Pronounced my name correctly. It is Ben Shankman, and I am an urban fantasy author and audiobook narrator. I actually have 3 series in the works right now. I currently have 6 published works, as well as 2 audiobooks that I both narrate and produce. So I have a dark comedy urban fantasy called The Devil You Know, that series. I have an straight up urban fantasy based on indigenous myths and animist kind of spirituality called The Chronicles of Corbin Pierce. The first book of that came out in October of last year. And you know, as Six mentioned, my latest release, which just came out at the end of March, is my first in the Cycle of Ash. It is a Jewish urban fantasy with noir vibes, My Brother's Keeper. And as for me, I can't keep my humor and sarcasm out of all of my books. I have a strong coffee habit, and otherwise, I have far too many hobbies to count, as well as a day job, a kid, a partner, and there are 3 cats in the house. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. But you wanted me to say a little bit about my latest release, or did I miss that? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, My Brother's Keeper. I call it Jewish urban fantasy because it is exactly that. The main character, the protagonist, Max Asher, is a Jewish mystic and private eye. It's a book that's really very close to my heart in ways that have grown since writing it. I myself am Jewish, raised Reform, bar mitzvah, all that stuff. And I really haven't been very connected to my own culture for a long time. And researching this book, because I wanted to see more Jewish urban fantasy with Jewish representation, gave me an opportunity to do that. So I say it has noir vibes because the first chapter opens in a cemetery where Max, who has come home to New Haven, Connecticut, to bury his identical twin brother, Saul. And so it's the story of Max, how he gets an understanding of what's happened to Saul through Saul's widow, Gabby, and their son, Jacob. It's got some found family vibes. It's got demons. It's got by the book magic, like by Jewish scripture. A lot of it is inspired directly out of the Talmud. It's just a lot of really good stuff in the source material. So I love this book. The reviews have been extremely positive, and it has what the readers describe as a pretty unforeseen, jaw-dropping twist.
Thank you for that,
Awesome
Ben.
sauce.
Go.
Doug, let's hear
Okay,
about you.
Doug.
Yeah, so I'm live in Toronto with my wife and youngest son, oldest son, and granddaughter are somewhere in the city as well. Um, started with short fiction back in the late '90s, and I stuck with short fiction for a while, and before I moved to novels. Now I have working on my 5th novel. I have first 4 novels. First was an urban fantasy with shapeshifters and Native Canadian mythology. And then the next 3 were urban fantasy trilogy, which aimed at young adult crossover. And I have 3 collections, and my most recent one just came out in the middle of March. I have a writer's guide called Playing the Short Game, How to Market and Sell Short Fiction. And I have a new writer's guide on the craft side of fiction called Brick by Brick, How to Build a Story. And that will be coming out in September. Um, the 5th novel I'm working on is actually science fiction. My short fiction crosses all the genres. Pick a genre, and I have a short story in that genre. The next novel is going to be near future post-apocalyptic science fiction that takes several of my short stories that I've written in that universe and puts them together and combines characters, etc.
Excellent.
And that's about it. The most recent collection has received a lot of good critical review. Editor's pick from Book Life, a starred review from Blow Ink, a starred review from Kirkus. So yeah, I'm happy with that. And the advantage of starting with short stories was that eventually you have enough of them that you can put out collections.
Very true. Very, very, very true. Okay, now comes to the fun.
I like how you're both
All right.
Canadian residents, because Connecticut counts.
It just gone. It's just cold.
Sir.
As somebody
Sir.
who used to live in upstate New York, I'm allowed to say that I know that anything above like Lake Ontario is like Canada.
I don't think that's above Lake Ontario.
I mean,
I guess in
I
parts
am
it
in
is. You're right.
Massachusetts
Yeah, oh, yeah.
technically.
I was gonna say you're like
I can't accept the laurel no matter how much I respect our Canadian neighbors. Unless they tell me that I'm an honorary Canadian, it doesn't count.
gotcha.
We'll accept Buffalo. How's that? We root for all the Buffalo teams. So.
Okay. All right. So, Ben, first question up. Which one of your characters across your series or even in your most recent book gave you the most hard time? Not like physically, like it's like you go to put them over here and then they decide to pop up over there. Like which character really gave you the hard time?
So I think to an extent. Okay. One character that I can't talk too much about because the problem is it's a spoiler in my first series. So in The Devil You Know, there is a character that appears in the second book that I cannot name because it will spoil things. But that character was supposed to be the villain of the second book. That character turned into a redemption arc over the next 3 books because like the fourth book I've drafted, it's done. I'm just trying to put my edits through before it goes to my editor. So that character absolutely would not stay in any box that I tried to put them in. So that was probably the most difficult to write. But I will say a character that I can talk about. So Corbin Pierce. And so Doug may appreciate this. So the Chronicles of Corbin Pierce is a series that was inspired by Charles DeLint's Newford series, and Charles DeLint being a very well-known and regarded Canadian urban fantasy and fantasy novelist. So Corbin Pierce, the do-gooder that he is, nonetheless, like there's a number of times that Corbin has ended up in situations where I've written things in a certain way, and upon reflection, I have to go back and change it because it isn't the right thing for the agency of the character. Or it isn't the right thing for the heart of the character. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you write something and you go back and you're like, I don't know, this feels really wishy-washy for this character, or this feels really gray morally for this character who isn't, or and you revisit it and you're like, I need to tweak this at least a little bit because the character won't let me rest on what I've done because it isn't, I've put a coat on them that is ill-fitting, and so I need to fix it. So that's the kind of trouble that I think Corbin, who, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, there's a fat raccoon in that series that starts with "Let Sleeping Gods Lie," Julie's best friend. And I just finished the draft of the second book, and the raccoon features prominently in that one as well. But Corbin gave me the same trouble in the second book, where I kept like having these things happen and then had to change or twist them because he was giving me trouble. So I think that's
Right.
my final answer is Corbin Pierce.
Gotcha.
How about you, Doug?
All right.
Difficult characters?
My turn. Yeah. First of all, I'm gonna just give a shout out to Charles DeLint as well. Charles is a friend of mine, and that friendship started when I had a collection come out in France, and the editor said it was fantasy stories, and the editor said, "Well, who would you like to get to write the introduction?" And well, I'm Canadian, and it's fantasy stories. So I said, "Well, Charles DeLint would be perfect." I didn't know him, and the editor said, "That's great. Why don't you ask him?" Uh, okay. So I reached out. I found a contact for Charles. I reached out and asked him if he'd consider writing the introduction. I will get to my answer, by the way, but I got to tell this. And he gave the most, what I would call the most Canadian of responses. His response was something like, I have not yet had the opportunity to enjoy your work. In other words, dude, I have no idea who you are. But he was kind enough to read the stories, and he did write the introduction, and it just began a friendship for us. And he ended up writing the introduction to my first novel. How I get to my answer. It's called The Wolf at the End of the World. It's shapeshifters. It's my own shapeshifter race called the Hiroka, and it is the sequel to the very first short story I ever wrote called Spirit Dance, which ended up being the first story I ever sold. Um, and I always intended that that would be my first novel when I moved from short stories to novels. And the big surprise for me was um, the main character in the short story called Gwyn Blade. Um, I figured he'd be the easy one to write because I knew him. He was the hero of the first story, and he ended up being the hardest. All the other characters in that novel, I love. Most of them were new. Some of them were from the first story. But getting back into Gwyn's head was much harder than I expected. And I don't know if it was just the time that had passed. So it was about a decade that had gone by before I started writing the novel, or I had changed, or maybe he had changed, whatever. That was a surprise. I eventually came to an agreement, and I eventually had fun once again writing his scenes. Um, in my urban fantasy trilogy, um, there there's a 17-year-old boy, 17-year-old girl. He's has these strange superpowers. That turns out she does too, but he's fabulously rich from a web comic that went viral, and she's a street kid. So they're very, very different backgrounds. But there's an initial sequence, dream sequence, where they meet in dream, and he's playing superhero, and they encounter a danger, and kind of steps forward and is going to battle the nemesis there. And I'm writing this and letting him do that, and it's like she is screaming at me in my head, saying, "No, no, I'm not going to let this guy, take care of me and protect me." So I ended up just stopping that, going back to the start of the scene, and just rewriting it um, with her basically stepping in front of him and beating the bad guys off. Um, and I always enjoyed every scene after that I wrote with her. All the characters in those books were fun to write. It was very easy to get into their heads. That first that first appearance was similar to what Ben was saying. I've got this character in my head saying, "There's no way I would be acting like that in that scene." And it's fun when your characters tell you what they should be doing. And about the redemption arc, I think you mentioned a character with a redemption arc, and I had a character that appeared in the first book who I thought was going to be the villain of the first book, and that would be it. And she ended up going through the whole trilogy and ended up having a redemption arc. I mentioned Charles DeLin again because after he read the trilogy, or the first book rather, he said, "I hope you're not planning on giving Morgan, this character, a redemption arc because she's just too evil. She's too bad. She doesn't deserve one." So she sort of gets one. She has an appropriate end. But yeah, it's an interesting parallel there.
Uh, we appreciate strong female characters here. We definitely we asked the question last session during any hard left turns your characters have taken. So that's a popular one. Something that Ben brought up briefly, and as is always a pitfall of author interviews and networking and such, is we do very blatantly say no spoilers. So if we ask you a question, please under no circumstances give out any spoilers. Everybody wants to read your stuff and be able to react authentically. We do have a question in the chat, and then I'll ask my question to follow up on that. So, are you a plotter, pantser, or planter? Doug, you can go first.
I'm definitely not a outliner. Um, I describe the way I write novels. I use a quote from Doctorow, and he once described writing a novel as being like driving across a desert at night. And he said you can only see as much of the road ahead of you as your headlights will illuminate, but you can still drive across an entire desert that way. And that's sort of how I write. I'll have an idea of what the city is, the destination on the other side of the desert, and I know where I'm starting from, and I know who's going to be in the car, my major characters. I can't start writing a book or a story if I don't know my characters well. But I only know about as much of the road as I can see from my headlights. I'll write 3, 4, 5, maybe 5 max chapter chunks, and I'll tend to work on them until I'm really happy with how they are. Not a lot of wordsmithing, but I need to know that I've got the voice right and the tone right, etc. And then once I've got that done, and I quite often submit them to my critique group um, and get their feedback. Once I'm happy with that sort of stretch of the road, then I'll write the next chunk of chapters. And I I did not know how the first book was going to end. I had an idea. I knew sort of what the final confrontation scene would be, although the setting totally changed. Um, I did not know how the trilogy was going to end, even what was going to happen in book 2 or book 3, except at a very high level. I was approaching the end of book 2. I actually had to rewrite the first part of the third act because I realized that I didn't have enough answers yet. So I actually stopped right then and I had a little Q&A with myself. I listed all the questions that I'd raised in this mystery. The trilogy is like one giant mystery that crosses the 3 books, so you have to read the books in order. And I ended up with it was 24 pages of questions and answers. And it was only at that point when I said, okay, now I know, and now I know why I did. Now I know if this person survived that mystery that we'd set up, etc. Um, and so, yeah, definitely a pantser, I guess. But as I said, I know where I'm going to end up at the other side of the desert, and I know who the characters are. Just get one stretch, drive to the next gas station, pit stop, and then keep going.
Less pantser, more spontaneous navigate.
Spontaneous navigator, I like that.
All right. How about you, Ben?
Yeah, I've also heard it described as a discovery writer in the you don't necessarily have a plan, you've got some ideas and you just kind of see what happens. I've evolved my process as I've gone, not in a so just to be clear, I don't say evolved in that any one method is better than the other. Whatever method ends with you getting a book finished is the right method for you. But I started out pretty much the way that Doug did, in that I had some big ideas, I had some characters, and I had to get into the thick of it to see how the story would turn out. But the more books that I've finished and honestly longer they've gotten, and by long I mean like my books still cap out at like 100,000 words in my latest stories. So it's still like genre appropriate for the work that I do. But I find myself, I used to just arm myself with a beat sheet, like a la Save the Cat writes a novel, because I feel like a beat sheet for me gives me the signposts that I need to stay on track as far as pacing goes. But then what I've found is the more that I've written, and in some cases, the more complex you go, the more books you write in a series, the more details that you have. So, like Doug was saying, by the time you get to the third book, even if it's not like a cliffhanger that you've been waiting to reveal, you've still got so much stuff built up by then that you're trying to account for all of your threads. And I found myself writing and then getting a little bit lost in the woods and finding that I need to outline at least a handful of chapters. And when I say outline, I really mean a chapter number and a 2-sentence summary of what I think is like the focus of the chapter, what I want out of it. And so I'll write like 5 chapter outline summary bits to then guide me as I go. I don't like the idea of fully outlining something because in a good story, I mean, okay, let me take that back because I don't want people to come at me for saying like I plot my stories to a T and they're all perfect. For me, part of the story is in building it organically and responding to the changes that happen as you write. And I know that if I outline 20 chapters, by the time I get to chapter 15, the outline for chapter 16 through 20 will be, if not useless, at least need to be reworked, reordered, or both. So, I'm a plantser. I work with a beat sheet to start with. I work with as minimal an outline as I can. Sometimes I know the beginning. Sometimes I know the end. Rarely do I know both. So that's kind of been my process.
So a spontaneous navigator and a hiker with their compass who just wants to enjoy the trail as it comes to them.
Yeah, we both seem to get there though, so that's good.
Well, neither of you have had to call in search and rescue that we're aware of, and we won't tell anybody if you have, so your secret's safe with us. I said my question was going to come up next. We have another one in chat right after that. My question for you guys is, do you have a strange ritual, like a piece of clothing you have to wear, a strange object you have to have on your desk, you have to spin around 3 times and quack like a duck before you sit down for a heavy writing session? Like, what's your, do you have one? No?
Who goes first?
Oh, I believe you do for this one.
Yeah, no, this is boring. No, yeah, that
Short
would be
answer.
a complete answer. Other than I need to have my mug of coffee with me, and it depends where I am. If I'm just writing at home, I'm very particular. I write in a comfy chair, my notebook on my lap. That's about it. Maybe
Straightforward.
listening to music. Like I will quite often have music playing. The only criteria is it can't have any words in it. I can't listen to words in a song and then try to be writing stories as well. So Vivaldi, I'm basically a hard rock kind of guy, but when I'm writing, I'll have a lot of Baroque music, and got probably 70 hours of Vivaldi that I could listen to, so I don't run out.
How about you, Ben?
So first, I just want to say, Doug, we're friends now. You keep saying things that are like, that's what I do. My first book. My Boss is the Devil, which is the first book in my The Devil You Know series, was mostly written to acoustic Celtic guitar. Because again, same, I can't listen to music with words in it if I'm trying to creatively write because it just knocks me directly out of it. My ritual though is I write best when I'm not at home. I have written plenty at home, but the reality is I've gotten into a habit of going to the coffee shops, to the cafes. And so, my goal is to write every day. So, do I have a ritual I must do? No, I can write anytime, anywhere, so long as I've got my little Chromebook and time and a wireless connection. But my word count goal in a given day is I try to write if I'm actively writing. Like right now, I'm in edits and recording and other stuff. But if I'm trying to churn out a story, my goal is to write at least 500 words a day. So modest goals, relatively easy to achieve, and all things considered, because I still work full time and all that stuff. But if I go to the cafes, I can much more easily put myself in the right headspace for being creative. Also, I keep myself highly caffeinated. So again, Doug, you and me both. Uh, the cafes help with that. For example, I have 2 short stories that I just wrote recently as part of anthologies that haven't been announced yet, so I can't talk about them here yet. But, I wrote 12,000 words over 2 days because I had enough time and caffeine at the cafes to knock like an entire short story out. So, yeah, coffee shop time is a big deal for me as far as like the ritual of writing.
If I could put an addendum to mine, I pre-COVID, that was my preferred day. I'd get up, I'd make a thermos of coffee, pick along some lunch, and I'd either go to the local library, um, or the local one of the local coffee shops too. Same thing. For me, it was I'm here, I might as well write, right? Whereas often at home, there are a lot of distractions.
It's I definitely know it's one of those questions where I'm not gonna get very interesting and wild answers 90% of the time, but I gotta ask because eventually I'm gonna get that one really weird one where someone's trying to hatch a basilisk and get an interesting answer. Julie, do you have a question, or you want me to read Aces from the chat first, or do you want to read it? Okay, I got it. Ace from chat asks, have you ever reached your intended end goal early and instead of putting in filler before, turned your goal to a midpoint and continued to a new end goal? This will go to Ben first. I guess I'll rephrase this one to simplify a little bit is, have you ever reached the end goal ahead of expectation, and what did you do to correct that?
I tend to have the opposite problem in that I'll hit something in the story that I thought might have been closer to the end, and then it turns out that there's more. So it's a little bit different in that I hit points that I didn't plan on ending. Um, but like nonetheless the story continues. Like I don't know how to say that. It's like you get 3/4 of the way through and you're like, oh, I'm 3/4 of the way through, and then you're like, no, I'm actually 2/3 of the way through because suddenly there's more of this story to write.
You're moving your own goalposts.
Yeah, so I've
Gotcha.
encountered more of the goalpost shifting than I've reached the end of the story. Let me turn the ending into a midpoint and have the B story get bigger or different or whatever. So I haven't really experienced that as much as just the end shifting out. I tend to my target historically had been 80,000 words for my novels, just as a because if you're doing beat sheets, the best thing that you can do is know roughly where you're going to go so that you can gauge out from like a word count perspective. Okay, good. I want to make sure that I don't spend too much time in the inciting incident. So by the time I hit here, I should be into this kind of part of the story beats. And again, beats don't work for everyone, but it works for me from a pacing perspective. And yeah, so I've found myself writing longer, like for aiming for 80,000 words, I've ended up with 90,000 and now 100,000 word stories, which ultimately, like, I'm not getting to the beats faster and then filling in the book. It just, in the end, it's taking me longer to get through the different kind of segments of the story that I'm building. So it just ends up being a bigger story overall.
How about you, Doug?
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, I would, when I started with short fiction, I would say back then most of the markets for short fiction were maximum 5,000 words, and I'd have an idea for a story. I say, yeah, I can do that in 5,000. Then I hit 7, I hit 8, and it's like, yeah, okay, maybe not. The advantage was it made me very good at editing and cutting out words. but my experience is similar to Ben's in novels. And my shortest novel is just under 120,000, and I think the Dream Rider trilogy is 125, 125, and almost 170 for the final book. And more experience. I always find that there's more to fill in, more that I want to include, and the book just ends up getting longer. I did have one experience on the last short story I finished, um, which is I had the honor of being one of what they call the anchor authors for a anthology that's coming out later this year, for the Kickstarter that funded it. Did a very famous long running speculative fiction magazine called On Spec in Canada, and it put out its last issue in December. And it may live on because one editor picked up the rights to the name, and they're going to be putting out an anthology of stories under the On Spec name. I was asked to write a story for that. I had this story idea in my mind for many years. I just never got around to writing it. And so I started. I was going great. And I was really happy with it. And I realized the ending I'd always planned for it, I wasn't happy with. So I did end up sort of getting to that point and saying, no, I'm going to keep going. Probably added another 500 words. The short story, it's barely 3,000 words. So that was a fairly long expansion. Usually, though, for short fiction, I've got the whole story mapped out in my mind. And for novels, it's more if journey of discovery. I think that was Ben's comment. And if you discover something, it could be a new character, it could be a subplot you want to expand a bit more. That tends to happen to me more, and ending up arriving at the ending before I expected. So.
Julie, are you back yet? Or are you still?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
All right, go for it.
I was just making sure everybody was done talking so I could turn my mic back. I was like trying to be nice.
Oh, gotcha.
So, what have you researched for a book that probably has you on a watch list?
Who
Ben
starts?
first.
Do I start?
Yep.
Let Ben start.
So okay, there. A lot of my work is slightly on. My first series is not so cozy, and then my other series definitely end up a bit more serious. I've had to do research about how long and how difficult it is to extract and test DNA from old bones. So that would probably get me on a list somewhere. I've had to research things about so many things about the occult, whether it be witchcraft or demonology, and in some cases I enjoy magical realism, trying to tie magic in a book to the real world in some fashion. So it's not just I summon a fireball. It's in order to make this fireball happen, I have to call upon the power of this angel because magic is given by God to the angels, etc. So like for my brother's keeper, that magic system that I was talking about, like I call it closer to magical realism just because it is very grounded in real world scripture. And I had to do a lot of research about those things too. So I expect that could get me on a list too. I also, for my latest book, Julia, I did have to research how much a raccoon can carry in his mouth. Just like side note, in case you're wondering what Scratch is up to these days.
Hey, Scratch has been my favorite character. For those that don't know, I did beta read one of Ben's books. And I got to the raccoon, and I think I ended up sending Ben like pages of stuff on just the raccoon, just on Scratch. And I'm like, no, I need Scratch. Scratch is my favorite animal. Scratch. And technically, I took Scratch and technically made them in human form, and now I have my own character, which is named Roscoe. So
Okay. I
just
appreciate
because
that. I appreciate that. So yeah, I've had to do a bunch of raccoon research, oddly enough. Uh, but yeah, other than that, I'm like nothing crazy. Not like I haven't like I don't write true crime in the same way. Like I did, it is noirish with a private eye, so I did have to do some research about some questionably legal activities for My Brother's Keeper. But for the most part, it's just kind of weird stuff rather than vaguely concerning stuff.
All right, Doug.
My turn.
What's your shady search history?
Most of it would probably have come from the research I did for my first novel. That was the Shapeshifter novel. So my shapeshifter species is called the Hiroka, and the key thing you need to know about them is that each of them have a different totem. So there's wolf totem, bear totem, cat totem, Hiroka. Um, and the vitality of the Hiroka as a species is tied to the vitality of their totem animal. So a lot of the Hiroka stories are related to them battling habitat destruction and environmental destruction because it removes the habitat of their animals, that weakens the animal, etc., weakens them. So in The Wolf at the End of the World, which is my first novel, um, there's a lot of environmental activism and some stuff I had to research. So include um, the design of a hydroelectric dam, for example, and then how to sabotage that, how to blow it up, how to disrupt the actual operation of the dam. So that probably has me on a list somewhere. Same novel. I had situations where they had to exhume a corpse, um, really recently buried one, and then one that had been buried for a couple of weeks. So I had to research exactly what DNA evidence they could extract from an exhumed corpse. Maybe that one. Those are the two that certainly come to mind.
It's only a problem when they can start drawing, connecting the dots. Like somebody in the FBI is looking at you guys' search history and going, okay, this is an author. They're into weird stuff. But when you start doing like, how do you blow up a hydroelectric dam? How do you make pipe bombs? How do okay, there's a trail here. Um, how do you train raccoons to attack a government facility by putting so much C4 in their
To
mouth?
blow up a dam.
Yeah. We got another question in chat. Ace again asks, "What's the craziest thing you've ever done to make something real enough for you to be able to write it?" You ever had to physically enact something to be able to put yourself into that mindset to know the experience, the sensory data to be able to write it out, or is it all just a creative process? Doug, you can go first.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind. I've written a couple of just mainstream literary stories, and one was based on the first 3 weeks of life of our youngest son, who is physical handicaps. And he had, as I say, he had an operation when he was 3 hours old, 3 days old, 3 weeks old. So it was a rough time, and I wrote a story fictional, but based on my experiences. So um, yeah, in terms of what I actually went through in order to be able to write that story, that was uh, pretty tough. I really can't think of another one. Wolf at the End of the World. Again, I did a lot of research with that. I was very almost paranoid about getting it right, especially the First Nations culture stuff. So I actually spent 2 weeks up in a northern Ontario town. I stayed at a Ojibwe First Nations. They had a just beautiful bread and breakfast. I interviewed the chief. I interviewed her mother. Hired a guide and went out into the woods went back into those woods by myself later, and I'm walking back out of the woods into my car, and like 30 feet down the road, big black bear and two cubs walk out. Thinking I'm really glad I didn't encounter them when I was in the woods, especially when the mother and her cubs. That would not have ended well. But beyond that, no, mostly I'm a writer because I can just look up stuff and write the stories that way.
How about you, Ben?
Yeah, I was going to ask, is it good or bad that I haven't had to do a lot of that? Partial, like does that mean that we are well-lived human beings, or with good imaginations, or does that mean that I have too much hubris in thinking that I can write these things without experiencing them? I I do think, just to kind of riff on what Doug was saying, when you're using material from a culture or a people that you yourself are not as familiar with, the burden of feeling like you're getting it right is different. Um, so I haven't done a lot of like physical, like I didn't, if I was gonna write about skydiving, I would watch videos about skydiving. I'm not actually gonna go do that myself. Um, but ironically, Let Sleeping Gods Lie, which is the first book of the Corbin Pierce series. That is also, it has an environmental take to it. The main character is a protector of the indigenous, like, spiritual flora and fauna and all of that, though he himself is not an indigenous person. But I did not nearly to the extent, but like I reached out to local tribes. I got connected to Clan Mother Shoren Piper of the Golden Hill Pogussets in Connecticut, who consulted and then was an early reader on my book after I wrote it, because of the themes and the culture that I put into it. There's a supporting character that is an indigenous person. I felt really strongly, again, like Doug said, you got to get it right. Uh, so I would say in those kinds of situations is where we're probably going to put most of our effort into the real life pieces of research.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, everyone's heard of method acting. I don't think I've ever heard of method authoring, and I think there would probably be a lot less popular books on Book Talk if that were the case, with the popular themes these days. So, um, we could definitely say that, and being that you're fiction authors for the, that's also, you can't exactly summon up a demon and say, hey, if I were to spray you with holy water, what would happen? So a lot of these things are kind of outside of the scope of life experiences.
I
Um,
mean, not with that attitude, you can't.
you're right. You're right.
Can I add one thing though?
Go
I
ahead.
think something where authors should do more research is body mechanics. If it's fantastical stuff, whatever. If it's magic, whatever. If you're trying to put someone in an arm bar and you don't know how an arm bar works, it sounds really, really weird when you're describing what physically can't work with the body. So it's like it's one of those things where I would prefer people do research into some of the most basic stuff, which is like how bodies work, because a lot of the stuff that people do for fight scenes and other things and all of that, while the fantastical stuff is fine and makes sense, it, I actually get lost as a reader when you tell me that I grab your wrist and then do this thing, and I'm like, why would I stand around and wait for you to do that to me? That's not how any of this works. So yeah, I just research wise, I would love to see more authors, go roll on an Aikido mat for like a introductory session to see how your bodies work.
All right. I see a bunch more questions in the chat. Oh, go ahead, Doug. You were saying something?
I was just going to say, I have, again, in The Wolf and some of my other stories, I have a character fighting in a karate style, but I studied karate for a number of years. I didn't go and study karate because I knew I wanted to use in a book. It's just something I knew, so I could then later use it.
You guys in the chat have some great questions here. We are coming up on our last bit of time, and we want to give our authors time to do their outros and plug their next stuff. We'll end on a more relatable question for both of you. You've both brought it up a bunch of times here, so I'll ask: on average, how many cups of coffee does it take to fuel a chapter? Doug, you can go first.
I used to when I was younger just drink coffee all day, and I have cut back, but I will start with a very large cups of coffee and just have that in my a very large mug beside me, and by the end of the mug, I'm ready to roll, and I'm doing pretty good. And if it's a longer day, I may add another cup later, but that's all.
So a
It's
mega
coffee, and I'm
pint,
just
as Johnny Depp would say.
make a pint. Yeah, I'm just like a giant Guinness, only it's coffee.
Gotcha. How about you, Ben?
I broke my caffeinometer in college. My body doesn't really know what to do with caffeine. It just knows that it needs it. So I pretty much play a game of chicken with myself where I consume enough coffee that I feel like a normal human being until I've consumed enough coffee that I feel ill. And then I back it off a little bit. So like we're talking probably at least like 6 cups of coffee in a given day over the course of the day from 7:30 a.m. until 4 or 5 o'clock at night. Add a couple of cups of tea in there for hydration and variety, but yeah, I mostly just I have a cup of coffee until I'm done drinking coffee, and that cup just keeps getting refilled.
All right, we're gonna go into our outros and plugs for upcoming projects or things you want people to go check out. I will come in on the tail end of that and say that Hold My Pen Promcast and its affiliates does not condone you consuming enough caffeine to lick the purple number 5. But make sure that if you have to get into that headspace to write your book, do what works for you, as was said earlier. Just do so responsibly. Thank you both for being here. You've both been wonderful. We started with Ben. We'll end with we'll start with Ben to end, and then let Doug take us out. Ben, what do you got coming up? Where do you want people to go to find you, and what should they look forward to?
Okay, so you can find me at benshankman.com. That's where you can find information about all of my books. You can also find some merch if you enjoy my books. My lovely partner, Katya, who is both the voice of Amy in my audiobooks for my first series, as well as the artist for my chapter art. If you like my chapter art, which are great little pencil sketches, those are available on merchandise. You can have a coffee mug to fuel your writing with my stuff on it. But yeah, you should go there. You should drop me an email because I love hearing from my readers. You should go check out My Brother's Keeper, which is my latest Jewish urban fantasy, and go check that out. And what do I have coming up next? I'm working on recording book 3 of The Devil You Know, which is called Too Many Gods in the Kitchen. And I'm almost done with my part of the recording. My lovely partner has to do their part of the recording, and then there's countless hours of editing until that's ready. So probably, mid to later this year.
Sounds excellent.
Okay.
We look forward to audiobooks. Go ahead, Doug.
Sticks. I don't know what you have up on the screen, so I don't know if you have links or covers. That's The Wolf at the End of the World. That was my first novel, urban fantasy, Shapeshifters. This is also urban fantasy. It's The Hollow Boys, the first book in the Dream Rider Saga trilogy.
We have
They're all 3
we
books.
have the Dream Rider Saga up next to you, so they can see part of that book cover there next to you.
Okay. And then most recently, this just came out in the middle of March. This is my 3rd collection, and it's getting really, really a lot of love from a lot of the top review sites. Borderlands, and it's got a couple of award winners in it, a bunch of award finalists, best of selections, etc. And it's everything. It's science fiction, fantasy, high fantasy, urban fantasy, humor, some very dark stuff, some horror, bit of everything. So yeah, that's it. And my website, if it's not showing, is really simple: Smithwriter, smithwriter.com.
Yep, I do have you guys' social links scrolling between your images, between your camera feeds on stream. So if you guys have been paying attention to that, Julie, do you want to take us out?
As always, thank you guys so much for being here. Everybody, this will conclude our Booked for Friday. If you know anybody who wants to be appearing on our show, please go to the Beacons link, fill out the submission so we can get them on, get them scheduled. We are looking for authors, narrators, cover artists, editors. It doesn't matter what the hell you do. If you are in the process of getting our shit on page, we want to talk to you. Otherwise,
Or in
please show
people's
up
ears,
tomorrow night.
not just on
What?
page, or in people's ears.
Or in people's ears. Well, that's why I list narrator and the author narrator. Just like if you are part of getting it on page, in our ears, or in front of our faces, we want to talk to you. Otherwise, please show up again tomorrow night for our Hold My Pen Promptcast, where we will be reading this week's prompt, which was a 3-way tie, if you guys remember correctly, and y'all are to blame for that. Like, you, the audience, were to blame because you voted. Sticks was even more to blame because instead of dividing the vote, he just went in there and made it a 3-way tie. Any bahoozle. Don't add to the subtract population. Don't subtract from the population. If you get your ass arrested, do not call me unless you got a good damn reason, and then I might put some money on your commissary. Otherwise, be brave, be bold, but always stay humble. We will see you again tomorrow night at 7 p.m., 8 p.m. Central. Well, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. Adjust your times accordingly. Bye, guys.
Hi, thanks for having me on.